Welcome to the Project Censored Show on Pacifica Radio. I'm your host, Mickey Huff. In this segment, we are delighted to bring back to the program investigative reporter, science writer Peter Byrne. You can learn more at peterbyrne.info. That's Peter B. YRNE.info. Peter Byrne is no stranger to the Project Censored world and our audience. Recently, among the many things that Peter researches and writes about, he wrote a piece for our dispatches on media and politics called Unplugging the News and History in San Francisco, navigating the existential fragility of online news archives. It's from November 14th, available at projectcensored.org. And Peter Byrne, first of all, welcome back to the program.
Oh, glad to be back, Mickey.
So, Peter Byrne, this in an era of news deserts and hedge funds and billionaires owning the press, there's this other side to things that I don't think has gotten a lot of attention, and that's kind of the core of your piece here, and that's about how, disappearing news archives, kind of memory holing entire independent media as institutions for covering important events. Peter Byrne, tell us about your story.
Well, as I pointed out in the article, journalism has always been called, sometimes ridiculously, but on the whole, I think accurately, the first drafts of history. I mean, when historians research the Civil War or uh, the CIA or whatever, they go to libraries and look up news stories. And for years, the libraries at universities and public libraries would create bound volumes of newspapers. You go in and you could actually read the actual newspapers from the day and flip through them, and they were indexed. And then at some point, as Nicholson Baker pointed out 25 years ago in his book Double Fold, which was really a good accounting of the process, the library started to just toss all the newspapers and put them on microfiche because it was easier to store and cheaper. But microfiche is not anywhere near as good as flipping through a newspaper and seeing the ads and seeing how the articles are placed and the bylines and everything. It's often very hard to read. It cracks, and it's inferior. But at least it did keep a record of the news. And then along came the internet. Now, when the millennium turned, I was a staff writer at the SF Wiki, which is a big alt weekly in San Francisco. It was every week, the number of pages was like 250 pages. We did a lot of investigative reporting. We did feature articles. We did reviews of rock concerts. It was the classic alt weekly format, which is now practically dead in America thanks to Craigslist and the internet. But that's a different story. At any rate, when the internet came along, we thought, well, we write these stories now and they're online, and so they'll be around forever because electrons are small and you can store them easily. Well, it turns out, of course, that compute is actually very expensive. And as the alt weeklies and the dailies in America started to be bought up en masse over the last 20 years by hedge funds, that just bought them to loot their assets and then toss them into the trash bin. They decided, from their bottom line point of view, that keeping these archives was too expensive, so they just turned them off. Now, there's still a few around. I mean, the New York Times has a pretty good archive if you want to pay for it, and a few of the other major dailies. And but people will say, "Well, I'll look up the article on the Wayback Machine," but the Wayback Machine is like crappy. I mean, it just does a kind of random crawl and it gets some stuff, but it doesn't get, much. And it's better than nothing. But there doesn't really seem to be anything out there except, well, the Library of Congress has some electronic formatting for newspapers, and LexisNexis does some. But for the most part, the average person cannot get access to newspaper archives going back uh, between now and 2000, and before that you have to pretty much go to the library and look at the microfiche. So what happened with the SF Weekly was pretty interesting, and this happened with a lot of smaller newspapers around the country. Is it was purchased in 2000 by Clint Riley, who is a real estate investor in San Francisco. He owns 4 or 5 downtown office towers. He used to be a political consultant. He was the guy that got Dianne Feinstein elected to governorship. He worked for hundreds of candidates over the years. He was known by his employees as Satan because not only was he preternaturally good at designing campaigns, his behaviors were rather satanic around his employees. He was known for a fierce temper, and it was not a well liked, let's put it that way. But he did leave the business because he, in his hubris, decided that instead of having politicians elected to office, he would himself like to run for office and seize power. So, to that end, in 1999, he ran for mayor of San Francisco. Now, here's a guy. He grew up in San Leandro, which is a poor area across the bay in the East Bay. Uh, but he ended up living in Seacliff in a huge mansion with a view of the Golden Gate Bridge because he's a pretty good business person. However, a good business person does not necessarily make a good mayor. And when he ran for mayor and he spent $4 a vote on it, he lost massively because one of his former employees, a reprehensible person named Jack Davis, uh, who was also a political consultant, uh, went live during the campaign with accusations that Clinton had beat up his former girlfriend named Gail Kaufman and produced some evidence of it. And so all the newspapers ran with it. And he completely lost the vote of people that think it's not a good idea to beat up your girlfriends. So he got creamed, but he still wanted to be mayor. And he had, during the campaign, called me up a lot because he was buttering me up because I had written a expose of the municipal railway and bus systems in the SF Weekly that he used in his campaign because he would print the articles in his campaign brochures and then say, I'm going to fix this, right? And so he called me up and asked me my advice about things. It was just like kind of funny. And his way of doing that was he would tell you like these cool gossips about other politicians and rich people, but he would say, but it's off the record, it's off the record, and he did that to all reporters. So anyway, a couple years go by, it's like 2001, and he wants to run again. He wants to rehabilitate himself. And so he calls me up and asked me if I would want to do a profile on him for the SF Weekly. And I'm like, yeah, but I want to tape record everything, and nothing is off the record ever. And we'll spend some time together. So we spent a lot of time together. You can read the piece. It's called "Who Was Clint Riley Really?" It's at my website, and you can also link to it from the article on Project Censored's website. It's pretty funny because at one point I interviewed his mom, Beth Riley, in her little living room in San Leandro, and she said, "Oh, Clint, he's not very lovable."
Oh my.
I actually, my tape recorder was broken that day, which Clint didn't know. So I said, your mom's just said you weren't very lovable. And he gets off the phone. He calls her. He calls me back, and he goes, "Oh well, yeah, she said it. I guess she knows me best." And he had kind of a strangling chuckle. And so we printed it, and then later I was told that the quote destroyed his career because any time he ran again, all they had to do was put up, a picture of him and his mom and saying that he was not lovable, right? He was never going to win, although maybe that wouldn't work these days, but it certainly was a fear back 20 years ago that if your mom hated you, you're not likely to be president or even mayor. But he keeps running his wife Janet, who was a public relations person at Mervyn's when they met for various offices, and she keeps losing. Although she was recently appointed as the chairperson of the Regents of the University of California, which is a plum reserved for people that give Gavin Newsom lots of money. Anyway, this is a digression. The point is that in 2000, this person, Clint Riley, bought the SF Weekly saying that, democracy dies in darkness. We love our reporters. And then he proceeded to fire the entire staff and got the newspaper. And he also bought the San Francisco Examiner, which is a piece of crap at the same time. And he turned them into just like advertising stuff. You go there and there's hardly any news, but you just scroll through endless ads. Law firms buy like huge pages of ads for people that get in accidents that need to sue, and your classic, escort ads, all that kind of stuff, right? Is coming through. Uh, and the news is just pretty much dead. So uh, I was like tooling around trying to, find out what happened to my articles that were on the SF Weekly when I realized that the website had been liquidated for the most part. They left a kind of a shell of it. Had a bunch of articles about Clint Riley being a philanthropist, Catholic kind of Opus Dei type philanthropist, and his wife running for various offices. But the article that I had done in 2001 was gone. But not only that one, I had written hundreds of pieces for the SF Weekly over the years, and they were all gone, right? So almost, I mean, even an investigation done by Lisa Davis that got a Polk Award on the radioactivity of the Hunter's Bay shipyard, which was a remarkable piece of reporting, was gone. So, it's dawned on me, well, how do I get these articles back? So I actually had to go down to the San Francisco library and get them off of microfiche in order to save them. I even had one piece in 2003. I had spent a lot of time with Kamala Harris when she was running for district attorney. So I had the first in-depth profile of Kamala Harris ever, which became very popular for obvious reasons later. But that was off the website now. I mean, history had been just defenestrated by Mr. Riley. So I saved a few things, and I may save some more in the future. You can see them at my website. It was a great expose of Gavin Newsom, and then also of Ro Khanna, which had disappeared. Mr. Khanna is increasingly powerful. People might want to read about his earlier life as a neocon. And so I reached out to Riley, of course, asking him, why did you kill the archives? But he didn't get back to me. None of his people got back to me. None of the people with the Essex Weekly or the San Francisco Examiner got back. And so the upshot is that you guys published the piece that I wrote, which I encourage people to read, because not only does it have the juicy tale about Clint's mother, uh, but on a more serious note, it touches a subject that I don't think anybody's really talking about, which is that online news media uh, can be censored and liquidated with the flip of a light switch. And it's not being archived for the most part, except by some of the major dailies like the New York Times, which could also get rid of stuff if they want, right? The libraries have, a few of them have some electronic databases, but I don't think they're doing much in the way of microfiche anymore, because in order to do microfiche, you have to have a piece of paper. And a lot of the news media is no longer on paper, right? Um, Not to mention television media too, which has, been electronic for a long time. And, that actually, even though it's despicable, I call it the news, NEWZ, trademark news.
Yeah.
You know, most of the so-called news now is actually news, but it just means that when historians want to go back and see what was going on in San Francisco for a long period of time, because the Weekly was around for 40 years, the Bay Guardian, which
Mhm.
was actually bought by the same company that ended up selling the buying this SF Weekly and selling it to Clint. I mean, there was a whole bunch of transfers over a period of time. Um, uh, their archive was saved because Tim Redman, who was the
Yeah.
editor, bought it and then put it on a website. But if he wanted to kill it, he could kill it. So there's no objective repository keeping this. And I think the Chronicle doesn't appear to have much of an archives. I mean, most of the hedge fund owned newspapers do not, because it is expensive to maintain an archives. And they're also like, they're not in the news business. Journalism, for the most part, is in the advertising business. So
Mhm.
they don't care about the news. They just want it there to you click on so you can buy something. I mean, the dirty little truth about journalism in America has always been that, the reporters will self-aggrandize and say, "Oh yeah, we just sell ads so we can do the news," but actually it's the reverse. They just do the news so they can actually sell ads.
Well, as AJ Liebling once quipped, freedom of the press belongs to those who own one. And in this case, you talk about San Francisco as a news desert, and you use this really interesting phrase, news cemeteries.
Yeah, yeah. Uh,
I thought that that was a pretty interesting way
the
of saying,
thing
in other
about
words,
it,
somebody can come along and buy something and just memory hole all of your work, and it didn't exist.
yeah. Well, but unfortunately, if it was in a cemetery,
You could visit it,
theoretically you could exhume it,
exhume
right?
it.
So it's more like news ovens.
Wow. It's pretty extraordinary, this story, Peter Byrne. Well, so do you see anything filling the void here? I mean, this is literally censoring history. I mean, you go back and look at what you just said moments ago, right? I mean, we're basically these people are buying these things or disappearing these things. We have the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine, which you call a hit or miss tool. So, I mean, what is to be done? What do you think is the pushback here? We've got a minute left in our conversation. Is there anything that can be done about this other than making people aware of it?
Well, a lot of people have been good reporters, like from the Intercept and other places, have been
Mm-hmm.
migrating to Substacks,
Mm-hmm.
which can be monetized. There's a lot of white noise on the Substacks, but some of them are good, especially like in Marin County. Eva Crisante's Marin County Confidential is doing some incredible path-breaking local news. I highly recommend looking at Marin County Confidential, and I think that's a good model for local reporting because it can be monetized. But as far as keeping it, it's up to Substack. If Substack doesn't like it, they can vanish it, right?
Yeah.
And then also, Substack relies on Stripe for all of its monetization. And so, in some cases of people that I know about, maybe they don't have a bank account or they've fallen afoul of the credit system. Stripe won't like monetize them. They won't let them actually get paid for the stuff that they're writing on Substack. So that's a form of control that is antithetical to journalism. I mean, journalism has always had these problems of being controlled by corporate advertising and stuff like that now. But now it's like even if you don't have advertising, which Substacks don't, you can't get paid unless you're approved by the system, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
what's going to happen to all your stuff? You got to save it yourself. And eventually you're going to run out of computer space. So I don't think that there's an easy answer to this, except that, as the next civil war kind of starts to crawl up our behinds here. Who knows what's going to happen in as the utterly corrupt Trump administration starts to piss off or annoy the ruling class banks and Chamber of Commerce. They may shut it down. Who knows what's going to happen with that? It could be rather amusing. But who wants to save like all the crap that the New York Times and the Washington Post like put out there every day? I don't care what George Will says and all that. Uh, that's on the one hand. On the other hand, if you wanted to bring criminal charges against people, it's good to have newspapers around to go and look up what was going on in the day. Um, so I'm in favor of keeping a record of everything, and the universe does. Just it's a question of accessing it and how.
Well, thank you very much, Peter Byrne, for writing this piece, Unplugging the News and History in San Francisco, Navigating the Existential Fragility of Online News Archives. It's available at projectcensored.org and syndicated other places online. And Peter, I can promise you that we won't disappear that. But I'm not sure what will happen in the distant future, but we're certainly going to make it available there. And we think people need to be increasingly aware of how history is literally being kind of flushed down the memory hole. Peter Byrne, thanks so much for joining us on the Project Censored show again today.
Thanks, Mickey.